Yay! Okay. All right. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for coming to our presentation tonight about diversity and cultural competency in the archives, a topic which I'm sure we can all agree is important. First, I would like to introduce our two speakers, and then we'll have the presentation plus a question and answer session at the end. All right, tonight we are fortunate to have two dynamic individuals with us. I'd like to introduce Helen Wong Smith, librarian and certified archivist. She is the executive director of the Kauai Historical Society and has worked in Pacific collections for over 35 years, including the Hawaiian collection at the University of Hawaii in Hilo, and lead archivist for the Pacific Island Network of the National Park Service. She has written extensively on Hawaiian cultural collections and is a strong advocate for cultural competencies in the archival profession. Our second speaker tonight will be Rebecca Hankins, Associate Professor and a Certified Archivist Librarian. She received her graduate degree from Louisiana State University in the year 2000. She has been at Texas A&M University since 2003, receiving tenure in 2010. Her previous employment included 12 years as a senior archivist at the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University in New Orleans, the premier research institution on Africana historical documentation. She teaches courses on the use of primary sources in research and research methodology. She has presented at numerous conference venues and published in science fiction, library, and archival and other peer-reviewed journals. Her areas of expertise include building collections and scholarly resources for the African diaspora, women and gender, and Arabic language. Her latest publication is a book co-authored with PhD candidate Miguel Juarez titled Where Are All the Librarians of Color? The Experiences of People of Color in Academia, published by the Library Juice Press in 2016. And I found a link for that, so I'm going to include that. So welcome, Helen and Rebecca. We're so glad you could speak with us tonight. And Helen, would you like to start?
Okay, great. Aloha, and it's still 3:30 in the afternoon in Hawaii, so I'm really appreciative this is not happening at 5 a.m. my time. So I'll just go ahead and say next slide, like we're in a big conference classroom. And I'm just going to give you a little bit about why I introduced cultural diversity competence to SAA. When you grow up in the most diverse state in the Union, as Hawaii is, and with a very small landmass, we are forced through generations to have cultural diversity competence. And so it was very difficult for me to realize that this was not innate for everybody else in the country. So this is why SAA had been discussing diversity initiatives for many years, since Elizabeth Atkins had introduced it to in her presidential speech in about 2008, I believe it was. And they still consider it a mega issue. There's a wonderful diversity reader that was put together and published by SAA, and they seem to still be grappling with how to make both SAA and the profession much more diverse. And I realized at the time I was still on council that maybe we should take a smaller chunk out of it, a smaller bite, and I introduced cultural competence to the rest of the council. And so I trained them for 90 minutes. They loved it, and I presented it to at the annual conference in Cleveland. And then I did a full-day workshop for council and staff. And so now it is going to be available because council feels it's so important, we are going to present it to everyone. I'll be giving it in Omaha, Nebraska at MAC in April, and then I will be giving the full-day workshop in Portland next year. So I want to share with you the precepts of cultural diversity competence, and then so you'll have a better understanding of why I think it is applicable to our profession. Next slide, please. So what is it? It's disability. People, no one is going to admit that they're not tolerant of other cultures, and no one's definitely not going to ever admit that that they treat other people that are unlike themselves differently. But if you look at this definition of what I'm trying to achieve with this training of cultural diversity competence, then you'll see that it's much more global and definitely not defined by just ethnicity. So it's the function. It's an ability. It's a skill set that you can learn. So what I have people do through the workshop is to realize that maybe their exposure to very different values or even behaviors might be so limited that then when they are presented with it, whether it be with your patrons or your donors or whoever you are working with, your coworkers may throw you for a loop. Next slide. So this is what we're trying to achieve, that you would combine the cultural mindedness with the skills, the communication skills, and that this will go not only on an interpersonal relationship, but within the institution itself. So this is what I'm hoping that it will be adopted, of course, on an individual level, and then it will spread and go on so that it's within our institution, and then it will show people that our profession is culturally competent. People, culturally competent, cultural competency is very extensively written in the professions of counseling, coaches, pharmacists, doctors, medical personnel, naturally. But I think that people forget the benefits and how it really is required, both as we're servicing people and working with our communities and within our communities. We cannot we cannot achieve, I should say, being a diverse profession or even a diverse society if we do not practice it ourselves within both SAA, within the profession and the allied professions. So, when you all take reference services in library school, you definitely learn the steps for an effective reference interview with a patron. Well, so much of that is going to rely on cultural competency as well. So let me see, can I change this slide myself? There we go. Okay, I did it. This is an example. I love this cartoon. This is an example that people think that, well, I learned a few words, I know what they're talking about, and I'm culturally competent. There we go. So I just like to bring this to people's attention that it's a lot more than that. So what is culture? And it's a local knowledge. And so when you look at this, it's a defined knowledge to a particular group. And this World Health Organization definition is bad because you never use the word that you're trying to define in the definition. But I think what the reason I like it is that it may be unique, it might be shared, but you have to look at the different cultures and societies in a much larger context, not necessarily geopolitical, not ethnic, not, so those are the other things. What I like to show people is this one, especially living in working conditions. That is a culture within itself. Your education background, the diversity is all of these things and more. So this is just something that in our state, and I'm sure in many other states, the type of education you received is a huge dividing factor within certain societies. So you might be of a particular racial, ethnic group, but just by virtue of the fact that you have a different kind of education. And this was something that was brought up during the 2008 presidential election. I don't want to get political because my heart rate will go up. But at the time, Daniel Inouye, the longest sitting senator from Hawaii, was was for Hillary Clinton, and he said that Barack Obama was out of touch with the common people. And his basis for that is because Barack Obama went to Punahou, the highest esteemed preparatory school in Hawaii. So he was making that distinction based on education. And so that I thought that was a good example, that could be a dividing factor amongst people. So I just saw somebody else using this cultural iceberg on Facebook today, and they were talking about the Native Hawaiian condition. But this is very appropriate, I think, that when you look at the factors below the waterline, you'll see that everything, including body language, thought patterns, gestures, of course, we all know that. Even things like concept of cleanliness, all of these things are factors of cultural values and should be added into cultural competency and just the awareness of this. So this is something that people should be cognizant of. So when you define cultural competency, that it really includes these three areas: the cognitive, affective, and behavioral. You cannot just appeal to somebody's intellectual values and assume that they'll adopt it. And this has been going on for those of us of color for many years. We're just assumed that, well, you want to have a professional job, you're just going to have to act like us, and you have to assimilate. So there you have it. But then we lose out so many people who can benefit our profession. So this is something that I really want people to be aware of, that it's holistic. It's holistic. You cannot treat somebody a certain way and assume that they'll get it. Here's the knowledge that culturally competent professionals will seek out. And this is a factor of inquiry that we should all have. You cannot assume that just because you dealt with one particular group in your last job that you can translate that and apply the same knowledge that you had at that other group to this group. Because even if there's a same culture, just by virtue of them being in a different location may change it enough to you may very well offend somebody. So this is something that we need to be aware of, the knowledge, the inquiry to apply wherever we go. So that's my short overview on what cultural competency involves. And I'll be happy to take questions after Rebecca.
Oh, that was wonderful. Should I go ahead again?
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about diversity and diversifying the archives. The book that was mentioned that in my bio, it's titled "Where Are All the Librarians of Color?" but it also is relevant because I consider myself an archivist to the archival community and archivists. About 5 or 6 of the individuals who wrote essays are archivists. So the title, it does mention librarianship, but there are archivists, including myself, as the editor, and I also wrote one of the essays. But I really am pleased that we partnered my presentation with Helen's, because oftentimes it is how we are defining these words and the intersection of many of these concepts with the profession itself. And so how we define cultural competency, diversity, it makes a difference. And they are very much intersecting concepts. So the definition that Miguel and I used in our book was, in terms of talking about diversity, was the inclusion, welcome, and support of individuals from all groups, encompassing all of the various characteristics of persons within the communities. And so that very much intersects with understanding that people come from, have intersecting identities, that we come from culturally different backgrounds, and how most people would see an African American may not be what they would see when they see me. They see an African American, but they don't see what is probably typically the African American. So understanding that diversity within groups is important to recognize too. I always tell the story of how when I first started at Texas A&M, which is a very conservative school, and including the African American community, I got a call the first couple of days I was here asking me if I would attend their church. Would I like to come to church? And the first thing I said was, "Have you seen me?" So it's this implication, that this idea that even if you are from the same ethnic or racial background, that you fit a particular category. And I get this all the time. So I think that it is definitely understanding that diversity means diversity even within the same racial groups, within the same religious group or ethnic groups, that there is diversity. And so you cannot say that this person, if they are that, then they are all, just like in the example that you gave about President Obama. The fact that he came from a different school was a marker for him, so people would not automatically assume he had the same background. So I get that all the time. So one of the things I did want to talk about was that diversity that I've had to deal with in terms of my career, and the fact that we as archivists are always dealing with diverse communities, and it is important that we embrace that diversity and try to represent as much of that diversity within our collecting policies, within our outreach to communities. It's important that we understand that there are groups that have been underrepresented and are marginalized within the archival community. So some of the things that I wrote here in terms of the kind of diverse types of work that I've been able to engage in is is part of who we are as archivists, and that we shouldn't box ourselves into that this is all we do. We're only going to be a subject selector, or we're only going to be reference archivists, or we're only going to be this. And I've had a wonderful opportunities to do a number of things, and these are different kinds of things that we can do as archivists, and that we should try to expand our understanding of these various roles and these various opportunities. A few months ago, there was a webinar on Fulbright, and I had thought about Fulbright as an academic, as a professor, but I hadn't thought about Fulbright as an archivist or librarian. But these are opportunities that we can take advantage of. So my diverse archival experiences, again, I've been in New Orleans. I was the senior archivist there for 12.5 years at the Homicide Research Center, which is, you know, a premier institution dealing with African American and African history. But I was also at the University of Arizona, where I dealt with political collections and political papers, which was a very interesting experience. And so these are opportunities that we have. It was interesting for me to deal with politicians, something that I had never thought I would do, and to be honest, never want to do again. But it was a really great experience learning how to really engage people who, in many ways, have to have huge egos in order to get into that profession. So these are just opportunities that we have out there, and I don't think we should limit ourselves. I haven't done it. I've been at Texas A&M since 2003. It's been important for me to diversify the archival space, and for me, that's part of our mission as archivists, that we have to make those spaces more welcoming for diverse groups. I've always felt it was important to develop collections of organizations and individuals and activities that others may be looked at as footnotes. So for me, it's been important to look at the civil rights movement and document those people who were engaged in other aspects, the people who were Marxists or socialists, or those individuals who decided that that it was important for them to be defensive, and to the people like the Black Panther parties and the Students for a Democratic Society, and those organizations of students who felt that self-defense was important to them. The Deacons for Defense, the other organizations that really were of the mindset that if they had to resort to violence, they would do it, because they were part of the civil rights movement. So it's always been important for me to document communities that we don't normally see, and to make sure that their voices are a part of whatever the narrative out there. So as you can see from this picture, it's science fiction. We have a huge science fiction collection. But our holdings on African Americans were very sparse, almost non-existent. but I pushed for us to collect on African Americans, Latinos, Asian writers. And for me, as someone who has always been interested in science fiction, it was important too to look at, well, how has Islam and Muslims contributed to this genre? And so I've written about it. I've made sure that we've collected on these communities. And it's the same thing with the civil rights movement, making sure that we have Hispanic and Latino individuals who were engaged in civil rights activities, especially in a place like Texas, where you always had the Latino community very active in civil rights activities. So it's always been important to me, and I think it's important as we are archivists that we include these groups that you don't normally hear or know about, because they are important to this whole narrative. And it's really interesting. At SAA, I was on a panel where it was the religious studies archivist panel, and one of the things that I came to talk to them about is the inclusion of Muslim voices when you're talking about African American history. And especially if you are collecting in the areas of African and African American history, the civil rights movement, slavery, these are areas where if you're leaving out Muslim voices, you're leaving out a significant part of African American history. So again, it's always been important to me to make sure we are including all of this, especially if we're talking about the U.S. history. It's important that we include everyone in those in the work that we do. So these are some of the things that I feel is really important when we do our exhibits. I just did an exhibit on the mayor of Houston, the former mayor of Houston, Anise Parker, who was the first openly gay woman to be elected to Houston as mayor. And she came, we invited her to come up. I hosted her talk. I did an exhibit on her. We have been building our collections on the LGBT community, and I also hosted her for a conversation she had with students. So it's important to me that these voices are heard and that they understand that their work is just as important as anyone else. And I think, so we already have our elevator speech, and I added some links to the Bureau of Labor Statistics if you're interested in becoming an archivist, and some of the fellowships and awards, scholarship. There is all kinds of opportunities for us as archivists. And finally, diversity matters. It matters that we are documenting all of our contributions to society.